On the night of June 7, 2026, Iran fired 10 ballistic missiles at northern Israel. Every single one was intercepted. 0 casualties, 0 structural damage. And here is the part almost everyone got wrong. That wasn't a failure. That was the plan. The question isn't why Iran's missiles missed. The question is why a regime down to its last rounds would fire 10 missiles it already knew would be shot out of the sky. The answer has almost nothing to do with Israel. It has everything to do with a deal being negotiated in secret, and the man who ordered the launch, who happens to be sitting on both sides of that negotiation at the same time. On day 100 of this war, Iran wasn't trying to win, it was trying to perform. Let me give you the board. This war opened in February 2026, when Israeli and American strikes decimated Iran's military infrastructure in a matter of days. A ceasefire took hold in April, fragile, frequently violated, but holding in the sense that neither side had returned to a full-scale exchange. Until June 7th, that ceasefire had one consistent feature. Iran had not fired a ballistic missile directly at Israel since the truce. The June 7th barrage broke that streak, the first direct ballistic missile attack on Israeli soil in roughly 2 months. But it didn't come out of nowhere. Hours earlier, Israeli aircraft struck Hezbollah command targets in the southern suburbs of Beirut. Lebanese sources reported 2 people killed and 11 wounded. Netanyahu declared that Hezbollah was in retreat as the IDF pressed its offensive in the south. And Iran had spent weeks warning that continued Israeli strikes on Hezbollah would draw a response. So the 10 missiles were Iran making good on that warning, a message that said, "We can still reach you." Remember that. The trouble is what happened to the message in flight. To understand the launch, you have to understand the man who signed off on it. His name is Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Speaker of Iran's parliament, just re-elected for a 7th consecutive year. Former IRGC commander, former mayor of Tehran, former chief of the national police. In a regime that has lost much of its old leadership, Ghalibaf has become the beam the whole structure now rests on, the connective tissue between the clerics, the Revolutionary Guard, and what's left of the political class. He's a protege of the figure now occupying the Supreme Leader's chair, Mojtaba Khamenei, and that's worth pausing on. In a system this hollowed out, the people willing to step into senior leadership are the hardest of the hardliners, the ones whose entire political identity is built on defiance. Ghalibaf is exactly that profile. Back in April, he was the one who publicly warned that continued Israeli operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon would bring explicit costs and strong responses. So when 10 missiles lifted off toward Israel on June 7th, that was Ghalibaf collecting on his own April promise. The voice of defiance, making good on a threat in front of a domestic audience that needed to see the regime do something. But here is the crack that runs straight through the center of this story. That same man, the loudest hawk in Tehran, the one vowing revenge, is also very probably the quiet back channel Washington has been using to talk about ending the entire war. The hardliner and the negotiator are the same person. That's not a contradiction the regime can hide. It's a contradiction the United States can drive a truck through. Now apply that to the missiles. According to President Trump, Iran is down to roughly 22% of its ballistic missile arsenal, a fifth of what it started this war with. Its ability to manufacture replacements was gutted in the February strikes. Every missile Iran fires now is one it cannot easily replace. So consider what it means for Ghalibaf to authorize launching 10 of them at the most capable layered air defense system on Earth. If the goal were to actually destroy Israeli targets, this is irrational. You don't spend 10 irreplaceable rounds on a target you are statistically almost certain to miss. But destruction was never the goal. The 10 missiles were meant to be seen launching and seen failing in a way Tehran could package for its own people. As we responded, we struck back. We are not finished. A performance staged for a domestic audience with the outcome known before the first missile cleared the rail. This is the reframe that changes everything about June 7th. It wasn't a military operation that failed. It was a political signal that succeeded. At the price of 10 missiles Iran will never get back. And Trump understood this immediately. His response wasn't outrage, it was a shrug. He said the strikes didn't hurt anybody. He said he would call Netanyahu directly and tell him not to retaliate, that each side had taken its turn and there was no need for another. He made clear he was displeased that the Beirut strike, the thing that triggered all of this, had not been coordinated with Washington. And he warned that Iranian missile fire would not help the negotiations he described as days from completion. Everyone, in other words, was being told to put their weapons down, because there was a deal on the table. Here's why Iran's performance was so safe to stage, and so revealing. Stopping a ballistic missile is a relay race. It begins the instant the missile clears Iranian soil, when space-based and ground radars catch the launch plume and hand the track data off in seconds. The top layer reaches out to meet the warhead above the atmosphere in the exo-atmospheric phase, with mid-tier and lower-tier systems backstopping anything that leaks through. On June 7th, that baton was passed cleanly, 10 launched, 10 handled, and this is the asymmetry that defines the entire conflict. Iran has to be perfect to score even once. It has to thread a single missile through a defense built in overlapping layers, which is exactly why it fires in volleys of 10, hoping saturation produces the one leak a single missile never could. The defense, by contrast, only has to keep doing what it has already done every night for 100 days. Iran needs a miracle, the defense needs a routine, and while that played out over Israel, a second American campaign was running in the Gulf. Over several days, US Central Command shot down Iranian one-way attack drones, threatening shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, then put ordnance on the Iranian coastal radar sites, feeding targeting data to the launchers. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and carrier air power doing the unglamorous work of keeping the strait open and choking off the oil revenue that keeps the regime solvent. Open-source imagery this week showed one of those struck missile sites with Iranian crews clearing debris from cratered bunkers, apparently trying to rebuild and reuse the same hardened positions that had already been found and hit once, which raises an uncomfortable question for Tehran about whether the same site survives being targeted a second time. Now contrast all of this with what was happening 2,000 miles north. That same week, Ukrainian long-range drones flew more than 1,000 kilometers and set a St. Petersburg oil terminal ablaze, one of Russia's largest fuel transshipment hubs. Timed to the exact morning Vladimir Putin opened an economic showcase in his own hometown. Kyiv's Deep Strike Command claims its 2026 campaign has now destroyed more than 170 Russian air defense systems. That is what it looks like when a weaker power actually tries to defeat a stronger one's air defenses. You don't throw your weapons into the teeth of the interceptors. You go around them with something cheap, and you destroy whatever they were built to defend. Iran did the opposite. It threw its scarcest weapons directly at the interceptors, which tells you it was never trying to win a military exchange at all. And the United States answered in the most telling way possible. Not with a counterstrike, with a video. In the hours after the launch, CENTCOM posted footage to its own channel, a highlight reel of American capability. An MH-60 helicopter, an FA-18F Super Hornet, two-seat, heavy with fuel for a refueling run, but still carrying air-to-air missiles, its crew in helmet-mounted queuing systems. An F-35 banking through the haze somewhere over open water, stealth skin catching the light, shipboardings, the 5-inch guns and 20mm cannon that had already torn through the engine rooms of vessels trying to run the blockade. It wasn't a threat in words, it was an inventory, a quiet message. This is what's still in the holster. We haven't drawn it. Because the most important fact about June 7th is that the side with overwhelming force chose not to use it. Trump holds Israel's green light to retaliate, and he is keeping it holstered. He's the one stating the deal is days away. He's the one announcing, almost casually, that Iran is down to a fifth of its arsenal, that is leverage at its most complete, total, and silent. So here is what June 7th actually was. 10 irreplaceable missiles, fired by the one man who is both Tehran's loudest hawk and its secret negotiator, at a defense system that was never going to let them through, for an audience back home that needed to see something burn even when nothing did. The interceptions weren't the story, the choreography was. Iran is now fighting two wars at once, and they contradict each other. The first is the war it performs, the missiles, the defiant statements about the Zionist aggressor, the revenge rhetoric for the cameras. The second is the war it's actually trying to end, quietly, through back channels, to get its frozen funds unlocked before the arsenal runs dry. Every missile it spends on the first war burns around it needs for leverage in the second. That's the trap of fighting from weakness while pretending to fight from strength. You have to keep performing power you no longer have, and every performance costs you a piece of the little you have left. 10 missiles went up on June 7th. 10 came down, and the only thing that actually landed was the message Iran least wanted to send, that it's rationing its final rounds for a show it can no longer afford to stage.